Commander Zethkar had studied war for 3 centuries. As the premier military strategist of the Valthian Empire, he had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. He had seen the methodical efficiency of the Korthak swarms, the brutal overwhelming force of the Draconian fleets, and the technological supremacy of the ancient Etherian dynasties. War, he believed, followed predictable patterns. Superior numbers, advanced technology, or strategic positioning determined victory. It was mathematics wrapped in violence. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Zethkar reviewed the tactical display with satisfaction. The human colony of New Geneva sprawled across the planet below, its population of 12 million completely unaware that their world was about to become another footnote in Valthian expansion. The humans had been spacefaring for barely 2 centuries, their technology primitive compared to empires that had conquered stars when Earth was still cooling. This would be a simple demonstration of power, a message to other upstart species about the futility of resistance. "Sir, we're detecting minimal orbital defenses," reported his aide, Lieutenant Vextai. 3 outdated defense platforms and a handful of patrol vessels. Their weapons appear to be projectile-based with basic energy shielding. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in amusement. Projectile weapons in an age of plasma cannons and quantum disruptors. The humans still threw metal at their enemies like primitive cave dwellers hurling rocks. "Any response to our arrival?" "They've sent several communication attempts, sir. Standard diplomatic protocols. They're requesting to know our intentions." "Ignore them. Begin the demonstration. Target their largest population center with a single orbital strike. Make it visible from space but keep casualties minimal. We want survivors to spread word of Valthian superiority." The massive ship's primary cannon charged with a low harmonic hum that vibrated through the hull. Zethkar had overseen hundreds of these demonstrations. A show of overwhelming force, followed by surrender, then integration into the Empire as a tributary world. Clean, efficient, profitable. The humans would join the dozen other species serving under Valthian rule, contributing their resources and labor to the greater glory of the Empire. The energy beam lanced down from orbit, carving a precisely calculated crater into the outskirts of New Geneva's capital city. Massive towers of smoke and debris billowed into the atmosphere as the strike vaporized several city blocks. On the tactical display, Zethkar watched communication traffic spike across the planet as the humans realized their situation. "Now we wait for their surrender," he told his bridge crew. "Standard procedure dictates they'll request terms within the next solar hour." But the response that came was unlike anything Zethkar had encountered in 3 centuries of conquest. "Valthian vessel, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. Your unprovoked attack on civilian targets constitutes an act of war against humanity. You have 30 minutes to withdraw from this system or face the consequences." Zethkar's translator implant struggled with several of the human terms. The concept they used for consequences seemed to carry additional emotional weight that didn't translate properly. More puzzling was their apparent lack of fear. Every other species had responded to orbital bombardment with immediate offers of surrender. "Admiral Chen," Zethkar responded, deciding to humor their bravado, "I am Commander Zethkar of the Valthian Empire. You have witnessed a fraction of our power. Your primitive weapons cannot harm vessels of imperial construction. Submit now, and your people will be granted favorable terms as subjects of the Empire." The humans' response came immediately. "Commander, you clearly don't understand who you're dealing with. This is humanity's first encounter with hostile alien life. We've been preparing for this moment since we first looked up at the stars. You picked the wrong species to bully." Zethkar found the humans' confidence absurd. He pulled up their species file on his command console. Humans were a relatively young race, having achieved spaceflight only recently. Their military doctrine appeared to be based on primitive concepts like combined arms and asymmetric warfare. They had never faced an opponent with energy weapons, gravity manipulation, or quantum shielding. Their largest ships were barely a tenth the size of his cruisers. "Lieutenant Vextai, scan the system for human military assets. Let's see what they're hiding. The sensor sweep revealed exactly what Zethkar expected. A few dozen human vessels scattered throughout the system, most of them clearly converted cargo ships with weapons hastily welded to their hulls. Their largest vessel, which the humans optimistically called a dreadnought, massed less than his smallest escort frigate. Sir, detecting multiple small craft launching from the planet's surface. Appears to be their entire atmospheric defense force. Zethkar watched dozens of tiny fighters streak up through the atmosphere. The primitive craft moved in tight formations, their pilots apparently hoping that numbers could overcome technological superiority. It would be educational for his younger officers to observe how quickly advanced shields and weaponry could eliminate such obsolete tactics. Weapons stations, prepare to engage. Target their fighters first, then their orbital vessels. Standard suppression pattern. Minimum necessary force to achieve surrender. The Valthian fleet began its attack with methodical precision. Plasma batteries opened fire on the approaching human fighters, expecting to vaporize them in the first volley. But something unexpected happened. The human craft didn't simply explode when hit by plasma bursts. Instead, they seemed to absorb tremendous damage while continuing their attack runs. Sir, these fighters are constructed differently than our intelligence suggested, reported his weapons officer. They appear to be heavily armored with some kind of reactive plating. Our standard plasma charges aren't penetrating effectively. Zethkar frowned. Reactive armor was an ancient defensive technology, abandoned by most civilizations because energy weapons could simply overwhelm it with sustained fire. But the human fighters were using it in ways his tactical systems hadn't anticipated. The first human fighter squadron reached weapons range of his escort vessels. Zethkar expected them to fire whatever primitive missiles or energy weapons they possessed, then retreat when faced with return fire. Instead, the human pilots did something that made his tactical computer issue error warnings. They rammed his ships. Not accidentally, but deliberately. The fighters came in low and fast, targeting specific points on his vessels' hulls with kinetic impact. The escort's shields absorbed most of the damage, but the sheer audacity of the tactic left Zethkar speechless. What species used suicide attacks as an opening gambit? Commander, we're receiving reports from Escort 7. The human pilots ejected at the last second before impact. They're using some kind of disposable craft? Zethkar's understanding of warfare began to crack around the edges. Disposable fighters? The economics alone made no sense. Why build aircraft designed to be destroyed in a single use? But, as he watched, more waves of human craft were already launching from the planet below. The human admiral's voice crackled over communications again. Commander Zethkar, you've now seen our atmospheric defense force. They're just getting warmed up. I'm going to give you one more chance to withdraw peacefully. Your suicidal tactics may have surprised my escorts, Admiral, but they changed nothing. You cannot harm vessels of this size with such primitive methods. Primitive? Admiral Chan's laugh carried a quality that made Zethkar's species equivalent of skin crawl. Commander, you just watched us turn garbage haulers into guided missiles in 30 minutes. That wasn't our fleet you just fought. That was a distraction. Alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Lieutenant Vextai's voice rose in pitch as he called out sensor readings. Sir, detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the outer system. Multiple contacts, moving at impossible velocities. On the tactical display, new icons appeared. Dozens of human vessels were emerging from behind the system's gas giant, their energy signatures completely different from anything Zethkar had seen before. These ships were smaller than his cruisers, but they moved with an agility that defied physics. More importantly, they were accelerating toward his fleet at speeds that should have liquefied any biological crew. How are they surviving those acceleration forces? His navigator whispered. The answer came as the human ships opened fire. Instead of energy weapons, they launched what appeared to be simple metal projectiles. But these projectiles moved at a significant percentage of light speed, and there were thousands of them. Zethkar's shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and traditional missiles, had never been tested against pure kinetic bombardment at relativistic velocities. The first impact sent shockwaves through his flagship. The Eternal Dominion's quantum shielding flickered and failed as tungsten rods moving at 12% of light speed punched through defensive barriers that had never failed before. Emergency klaxons wailed as hull breaches appeared throughout his fleet. Damage report. Zethkar commanded. Sir, their projectiles are somehow bypassing our shields entirely. These appear to be simple metal rods, but moving at velocities our defensive systems can't compensate for. Zethkar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. The humans had weaponized the most basic law of physics. Kinetic energy increased exponentially with velocity. At near-light speeds, even a pebble became a devastating weapon. But, achieving those velocities required energy expenditure that most civilizations reserved for interstellar travel, not ammunition. Sir, receiving a message from the human admiral. Admiral Chen's voice now carried a tone that Zethkar recognized from his own communications with defeated enemies. Commander, what you're experiencing is called a kinetic kill vehicle. We accelerate simple tungsten rods to 12% of light speed and let physics do the rest. Each projectile hits with roughly the same energy as your orbital bombardment. The difference is, we have about 10,000 of them ready to fire. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. Zethkar's shields were failing across his entire fleet, and the human ships were repositioning for another volley. Worse, his own weapons seemed ineffective against targets moving with such unpredictable acceleration patterns. Sir, request permission to retreat to minimum safe distance and call for reinforcements. Zethkar's mandibles clicked in frustration. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never retreated from a primitive civilization. But nothing about this engagement followed the rules of warfare as he understood them. Negative. We maintain position. All ships, target their largest vessel and fire everything we have. Show them the true power of the Empire. The Valthian fleet's combined firepower focused on Admiral Chen's flagship. Plasma cannons, quantum disruptors, and gravity bombs converged on the human vessel in a display of destructive force that could have cracked a small moon. The human ship disappeared in the explosion, vaporized so completely that not even debris remained. For a moment, silence filled the communications channels. Then, Admiral Chen's voice returned, now coming from a different vessel entirely. Nice shot, Commander. You destroyed one of our ships. Unfortunately for you, we have a few more. Zethkar's tactical display showed something that violated every principle of space combat he had learned over 3 centuries. The human fleet had not retreated after losing their flagship. Instead, they had accelerated toward his formation, closing distance at velocities that made precision targeting nearly impossible. Even more disturbing was their communication behavior. Instead of the silence or desperate pleas he expected from a fleet taking casualties, the human channels buzzed with what his translator identified as humor and casual conversation. Lieutenant Vextai, are you certain our translation systems are functioning correctly? Zethkar asked, listening to the stream of human chatter. These pilots appear to be laughing? Yes, sir, the systems are functioning normally. The humans seem to be sharing what they call jokes while under fire. The concept made no sense to Zethkar. Every military doctrine he knew emphasized the psychological pressure of combat, the fear and stress that could break an opponent's will to fight. Yet these humans treated warfare like some form of entertainment. Valthian Commander, Admiral Chen's voice cut through the fighter chatter, you seem confused by our response. Let me explain something about human nature. We've been fighting each other for our entire history. War isn't something we fear, it's something we're extremely good at. As if to demonstrate her point, the human fleet split into 3 separate formations, each attacking his ships from different vectors simultaneously. Zethkar recognized the tactic from his ancient military histories. It was called combined arms, a primitive strategy that multiple civilizations had used before developing more sophisticated approaches. But the humans were executing it with technology that shouldn't have existed. Sir, the human formations are communicating with quantum encrypted channels that change frequency every microsecond. Our intelligence systems can't penetrate their coordination network. How is that possible? Our intelligence estimated human communication technology at least 50 years behind imperial standards. Unknown, sir, but the encryption appears to be based on mathematical principles our computers can't solve in real time. Zethkar watched his fleet being systematically dismantled by tactics that combined primitive strategy with impossible technology. The humans fought like they had been designed specifically to counter Valthian advantages. Their ships were too fast for his weapons to track, too heavily armored for his energy weapons to penetrate quickly, and too numerous for his fleet to engage effectively. More disturbing was their apparent disregard for losses. When Zethkar's forces managed to destroy a human vessel, the other ships didn't retreat or regroup. They accelerated toward the Valthian fleet even faster, as if the loss had made them more aggressive rather than more cautious. Sir, detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching from outside the system. Large formations, moving at maximum velocity. Reinforcements? Zethkar asked hopefully. No, sir, the energy signatures are human. Appears to be their main fleet arriving. The tactical display exploded with new contacts as dozens of human vessels emerged from hyperspace. But these weren't the converted cargo ships and improvised fighters that had been giving his fleet so much trouble. These were purpose-built warships, and their energy signatures were completely different from anything in his tactical database. Admiral Chan's voice returned, now carrying a tone that Zethkar's translator struggled to process. Commander Zethkar, I'd like you to meet the Terran Defense Force's 6th Fleet. They've been traveling for 3 days to get here, and they're somewhat irritated about missing their scheduled shore leave. The new human ships moved with the same impossible agility as the first wave, but their weapons systems were entirely different. Instead of kinetic projectiles, they deployed swarms of objects that Zethkar's sensors couldn't properly classify. Sir, the human ships are releasing some kind of autonomous units? They're too small to be fighters, but they're maneuvering independently. Thousands of tiny objects spread out from the human fleet like a metallic cloud. Each one was no larger than a Valthian pilot, but they moved with precision that suggested advanced artificial intelligence. As Zethkar watched, the swarm began to coalesce around his ships like predators surrounding prey. Weapons systems, target the swarm. All batteries, open fire. The Valthian fleet's energy weapons lanced out toward the approaching cloud, but something impossible happened. The tiny objects didn't simply evade the weapons fire, they seemed to predict where each shot would be aimed, moving to avoid impacts before the weapons had even fired. Sir, these units appear to be using some form of precognitive targeting system. They're avoiding our weapons fire with impossible accuracy. There's no such thing as precognitive targeting. Run a detailed scan of their movement patterns. The analysis that came back made Zethkar question his understanding of military technology. The human drones weren't predicting weapon fire through some impossible technology. They were calculating it. Their artificial intelligence systems were processing his fleet's targeting data faster than his weapons could acquire locks, then extrapolating firing solutions before his gunners could execute them. They're off-thinking our tactical computers in real time, Lieutenant Vextai reported with something that sounded like awe in his voice. The swarm reached his ships and began to attach themselves to his hulls. Zethkar expected some kind of explosive payload, but instead the drones simply started cutting. Thousands of them, each one equipped with tools that could slice through Imperial armor like it was atmospheric gas. Sir, they're not trying to destroy us. They appear to be disassembling our ships. What? The drones are systematically removing our weapons systems, our engines, our life support. They're taking our ships apart piece by piece. Admiral Chan's voice filled the bridge again. Commander, what you're experiencing is human approach to warfare called total system disruption. Instead of destroying your ships and killing your crews, we're simply making sure you can't hurt anyone. Your people will live, but your ability to make war ends here. Zethkar stared at his tactical display as his once mighty fleet was reduced to floating shells by an army of machines smaller than his soldiers. The humans had defeated him without even attempting to kill his people. It was a level of precision and control that no military doctrine had prepared him for. Sir, all weapons systems are offline. Engines are failing across the fleet. Life support is at minimal levels but stable. How long until we lose orbital position? 6 hours, sir. We'll begin atmospheric entry whether we want to or not. The human admiral's next transmission carried an offer that Zethkar had never heard from a conquering force. Commander, we're prepared to evacuate your personnel to safety before your ships enter the atmosphere. We have medical facilities standing by and no interest in taking prisoners. But, first, I need you to understand something. What? Zethkar managed. This was a defensive engagement. You attacked one of our colonies with no provocation, and we responded with minimal necessary force to stop you. But, if you or your empire make the mistake of threatening humanity again, what you've seen today will seem like a gentle introduction. Impossible. This was your full military response. You've committed your entire defense force. Admiral Chen's laugh carried a quality that made Zethkar's species' version of blood run cold. Commander, this was a colony defense force. New Geneva is considered a minor agricultural world with minimal strategic value. What you fought today represents about 3% of the Terran defense force. The number hit Zethkar like a physical blow. 3%. Everything he had witnessed, the impossible technology, the precision tactics, the casual destruction of his fleet, had been accomplished by 3% of human military capability. That can't be accurate. Our intelligence estimates suggested human military capacity was minimal. Your intelligence was wrong, Commander. Humanity has been preparing for alien contact since we first achieved spaceflight. We assumed that any species capable of interstellar travel would be either extremely peaceful or extremely dangerous. We prepared for the worst-case scenario. As if to demonstrate the point, Zethkar's sensors detected additional hyperspace signatures throughout the system. Not ships this time, but massive installations materializing as if they had been hidden in folded space. Defense platforms, weapons satellites, and structures that his tactical computer couldn't even classify. We've been watching your empire for 6 months, Commander. We know about your expansion policies, your tributary worlds, and your approach to conquest. We've been preparing specifically for this encounter since the day your scouts first entered human territory. Zethkar felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 centuries of conquest. Fear. Not just fear of defeat, but fear of an opponent whose capabilities seemed to expand every time he thought he understood them. What do you want? He asked. Right now? We want you and your people to go home safely. We want you to tell your empire exactly what happened here today. And we want your leadership to understand that humanity is not interested in being anyone's tributary world. And if the empire decides to return with a larger force? The pause before Admiral Chen answered was filled with implications that Zethkar's translator couldn't properly process. Commander, what you've seen today was us being polite. Zethkar stood in the Valthian Imperial Council chamber, facing questions he couldn't adequately answer. The massive hall, carved from a single crystal formation on the Empire's capital world, had witnessed reports of conquest for over a millennium. Today, for the first time, it hosted a briefing about defeat. Explain to us again, Commander, how a primitive species destroyed the 7th Fleet with projectile weapons, demanded High Admiral Korvex, his ceremonial armor clicking with agitation. Respected Admiral, the humans' projectile weapons were not primitive. They accelerated simple metal to near-light velocities. At those speeds, even basic matter becomes devastatingly effective. And our shields? Designed to deflect energy weapons and conventional explosives, sir. Kinetic bombardment at relativistic speeds was outside the parameters of our defensive systems. The Council exchanged looks that Zethkar had learned to recognize as profound concern. The Valthian Empire had built its expansion on technological superiority. The idea that a younger civilization had developed weapons their defenses couldn't handle challenged fundamental assumptions about their military dominance. High Commander Thexvel, the Empire's chief strategist, leaned forward. What are your recommendations for a proper conquest fleet, Commander? Sir, I must respectfully suggest that conquest of human territory would be inadvisable. The chamber fell silent. In over 8 centuries of expansion, no Valthian military officer had ever recommended avoiding conflict with a potential tributary species.
Elaborate, High Commander Thexval ordered.
Zethkar activated the holographic display in the center of the chamber. Images from the battle at New Geneva materialized in three-dimensional detail, showing the systematic dismantling of his fleet. The humans demonstrated several capabilities that suggest they've been preparing specifically for contact with advanced spacefaring civilizations.
Their defensive doctrine assumes that any alien species they encounter will possess superior technology. Then, how did they achieve victory?
They didn't try to match our technology, sir. They developed entirely different approaches. Where we use energy weapons, they perfected kinetic bombardment. Where we rely on heavy shielding, they emphasize speed and maneuverability. Where we deploy large, heavily armed vessels, they use swarms of smaller units with distributed intelligence.
High Admiral Korvax studied the tactical data with growing unease. These drone swarms explain their capabilities.
Individual units are approximately the size of a Valthian soldier, but they operate with collective intelligence that allows them to outcalculate our tactical systems in real time. They can predict our weapons targeting and maneuver to avoid fire before we complete target acquisition.
How many of these units did they deploy? Zethkar hesitated.
The number still seemed impossible. Approximately 50,000, sir.
Per ship. The council members' agitation was visible now.
The mathematics of drone warfare suddenly became clear.
Each human vessel could deploy enough autonomous units to overwhelm traditional defensive measures through pure numbers.
And, you believe this was their defensive capability only?
Yes, sir. Admiral Chen specifically stated that New Geneva was considered a minor agricultural colony.
The forces we encountered represented approximately 3% of human military capacity.
High Commander Thexval was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. Commander, what is your assessment of human military doctrine?
Sir, they appear to have developed what they call asymmetric warfare to an unprecedented level. Every engagement principle they demonstrated was designed to counter advantages typically held by more advanced civilizations.
Zethkar brought up additional tactical data. For example, their communication systems use quantum encryption that changes parameters faster than our intelligence networks can adapt.
Their ship designs prioritize acceleration over firepower, making them extremely difficult to target. Their weapons systems use physics rather than advanced technology, making them nearly impossible to defend against with conventional shielding. You're describing a civilization that has weaponized their own technological limitations.
Precisely, sir.
They've turned every disadvantage into a strategic asset. Where other species develop advanced energy weapons, humans perfected simple kinetic bombardment. Where others build larger ships, humans build faster ones. Where others rely on sophisticated AI, humans use collective intelligence networks.
High Admiral Korvax asked the question that everyone in the chamber was considering. What would be required for successful conquest of human territory?
Zethkar had spent months analyzing that exact question. His conclusion was sobering. Sir, based on the capabilities we observed, successful military action against humanity would require a fleet approximately 50 times the size of our current total military capacity.
Even then, victory would be uncertain. The silence that followed lasted for several minutes. Explain your reasoning, Commander.
The humans demonstrated the ability to retrofit cargo vessels into effective warships in a matter of hours. Their industrial capacity appears to be geared toward rapid military production. They also showed no signs of psychological breakdown under pressure. In fact, they seemed to become more effective as casualties increased.
Zethkar highlighted specific elements of the engagement.
Most concerning is their apparent preparation for exactly this type of conflict.
They've clearly been developing anti-alien warfare doctrine for some time.
Every tactic they used suggested detailed knowledge of imperial military procedures.
You believe they've been studying us?
Yes, sir. Admiral Chen indicated they had been observing our expansion activities for months. They knew our ship classifications, our standard tactical procedures, and our conquest protocols. They had prepared specific countermeasures for every advantage we typically employ.
High Commander Thexval leaned back in his ceremonial chair. Commander, are you suggesting that the humans represent a threat to the Empire?
Sir, I believe the humans represent something the Empire has never encountered before. They're a species that has achieved spaceflight specifically to prepare for contact with potentially hostile alien civilizations. Their entire military doctrine is built around fighting opponents with superior technology. The implications of that statement settled over the council chamber like a heavy atmosphere.
What are your recommendations, Commander?
Zethkar had prepared for this question. His answer would either mark him as a coward or potentially save the Empire from a catastrophic miscalculation.
Sir, I recommend we classify human space as a restricted zone. No Imperial vessel should enter their territory without explicit authorization from the High Council.
I further recommend we open diplomatic channels to establish formal non-aggression agreements.
You're suggesting we treat them as equals?
Sir, I'm suggesting we treat them as what they are. A species that has spent their entire spacefaring history preparing to fight civilizations like ours.
They're not potential tributaries.
They're potential conquerors. The chamber erupted in protests and arguments, but High Commander Thexval raised a hand for silence. Commander Zethkar, you will prepare a detailed report on human military capabilities for distribution to all fleet commanders. Any Imperial vessel that encounters human forces is to withdraw immediately and report contact to this council.
And if the humans expand into Imperial territory? High Commander Thexval studied the tactical displays one more time.
Then, we will learn whether the Empire can adapt as effectively as humanity has. 3 months later, Zethkar received a communication that changed his understanding of warfare once again.
It was from Admiral Chen, transmitted directly to his personal quarters on the Imperial capital world.
Commander Zethkar, I wanted to thank you for ensuring that your people understood the situation at New Geneva. We've been monitoring Imperial communications, and we're pleased to see that your leadership has chosen the path of wisdom. The fact that humans had somehow penetrated Imperial communication networks was disturbing enough, but Admiral Chen's next statement was even more unsettling.
We wanted you to know that humanity is establishing formal diplomatic relations with 17 species that were formerly under Imperial rule.
It seems that word of our little engagement has spread throughout this sector. Several of your former tributary worlds have asked for our assistance in negotiating independence.
Zethkar realized that the humans hadn't just defeated his fleet.
They had shattered the foundation of Imperial expansion by proving that advanced civilizations could be successfully resisted. Commander, we hope the Empire will choose to join the growing alliance of independent species in this region.
Humanity believes that cooperation produces better results than conquest.
As he studied reports of Imperial tributary worlds declaring independence with human support, Zethkar understood that his encounter at New Geneva had been more than a military defeat. It had been the beginning of a fundamental change in the balance of power throughout the galaxy.
The humans hadn't just won a battle.
They had redefined what victory meant.
Admiral Chen's final message carried a warmth that surprised him.
We look forward to working with the Valthian Empire as partners rather than adversaries.
Humanity has learned that former enemies often make the most valuable allies.
Zethkar looked out at the stars beyond his window and realized that his 3 centuries of studying war had taught him everything except the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the greatest victory was knowing when not to fight. The humans had understood war better than anyone he had ever encountered. But, more importantly, they understood peace.